Welcome to this deep dive into one of the darkest and most unsettling tales in American history. Well, here it is. The year is 1908, and the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky rise like ancient geological monuments against a sky that seems perpetually shrouded in shades of gray and slate. This is a landscape carved by millennia of erosion, where limestone ridges give way to steep valleys filled with dense forests of oak, hickory, and pine. The mountains themselves are not particularly tall by Western standards, rarely exceeding 4,000 feet, but their steep slopes and tangled hollows create an environment of extreme isolation where communities exist in pockets separated by miles of nearly impassable terrain. In the remote hollow known locally as Shadow Hollow, a name that appears on no official map but is understood by everyone within a 50-mile radius, the morning fog rolls down from the peaks with such regularity and density that residents set their daily schedules by its arrival and departure. This fog is not the gentle mist of lowland regions but a thick, almost tangible presence that reduces visibility to mere feet, muffles sound, and transforms familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions of themselves. From this perpetual gray emerge two identical faces each morning, beautiful and terrible in their perfect symmetry, moving through the fog like twin apparitions materialized from the mountain itself. Lily and Rose Hargrove are 23 years old in this winter of 1908, born on a January night so brutally cold that the midwife who attended their birth later claimed she could see her breath freeze in the air inside the cabin where their mother labored. That mother, whose name was Sarah Hargrove and who came from a respectable farming family in the flatlands near Lexington, died before dawn could break on that terrible night, her body unable to sustain the double burden of bringing twins into this harsh world where survival is difficult enough for single births. The doctor, summoned too late from the mining camp 15 miles away, arrived to find 2 living infants and 1 dead woman, the cabin filled with the metallic smell of blood and the piercing cries of newborns who would never know their mother's face. Jacob Hargrove, the father who survived his wife by 20 years, was a coal miner of the type that populated these mountains by the thousands in the early 20th century. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighed 160 pounds after a good meal, and possessed the wiry strength that comes from spending 10 hours daily in cramped mine shafts swinging a pickaxe in near total darkness. His hands were permanently blackened by coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could remove, ground into the creases of his palms and under his fingernails like tattoos of his occupation. He raised his twin daughters alone in a weathered cabin perched precariously on the mountainside approximately 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, where the wind howled through gaps in the wooden planks during winter and the smell of damp earth was constant and oppressive regardless of season. The cabin measured roughly 20 feet by 15 feet, contained a single room divided by hanging blankets into sleeping and living areas, and featured a stone fireplace that provided heat and cooking fire but never quite managed to drive out the bone-deep chill that characterized life at this elevation. Jacob worked the morning shift at the Black Mountain Mine No. 3, leaving the cabin before dawn and returning after sunset 6 days each week, earning $2.40 per day for labor that aged men prematurely and killed them regularly through accident, explosion, or the slow suffocation of pneumoconiosis. He raised his daughters with rough affection, teaching them to cook cornmeal and preserve vegetables, to sew and clean, to fear God and respect authority, but he could not teach them warmth or emotional connection because he himself possessed little of either quality. The loss of his wife had hollowed him out emotionally, leaving only the bare minimum required for survival and the discharge of basic paternal duties. The twins grew up in an environment of silence and isolation, speaking primarily to each other, developing a bond so intense and exclusive that it seemed to require no external input or validation. Lily and Rose are unnaturally beautiful in a region where hardship has carved deep lines into faces before their 30th year, where women lose teeth during pregnancy and men develop permanent stoops from laboring in mine shafts barely 4 feet high. Their skin is pale as mountain laurel blossoms, untouched by the sun weathering that characterizes outdoor labor, smooth and flawless in a way that seems almost artificial against the rough textures of Appalachian poverty. Their hair is black as coal seams, thick and lustrous, falling past their shoulders in waves that catch light even on overcast days. Their eyes hold a peculiar darkness that some in the community interpret as profound grief for their lost mother and others as something more sinister and unknowable, a quality that makes prolonged eye contact uncomfortable. They stand 5 feet 6 inches tall, slender but not frail, moving with a synchronized grace that appears rehearsed though it is entirely natural, the product of 23 years spent in constant proximity and communication. The twins wear identical dresses sewn from fabric their father purchases on rare trips to the mining company store in Hazard, the county seat located 23 miles distant. These dresses are simple affairs, usually gray or brown or dark blue, made from cheap cotton that wears thin after a single season but serves its purpose of maintaining modesty and providing minimal protection against weather. They own 3 dresses each, rotating through them on a weekly basis, washing them in the creek that runs behind their cabin when weather permits and hanging them to dry on branches near the fireplace during winter. They possess 1 pair of shoes each, sturdy leather boots purchased 2 years ago that are now cracked and worn but still serviceable. In warmer months they go barefoot, their feet developing calluses thick enough to walk over rocky terrain without discomfort. They own no jewelry except for matching silver lockets containing a faded daguerreotype of their mother, gifts from their father on their 16th birthday, worn constantly around their necks on thin chains that leave green marks on their pale skin. The local women whisper about the twins with a mixture of envy and suspicion that characterizes female social dynamics in isolated communities where beauty is rare and therefore both prized and resented. They note how the sisters seem to communicate without speaking, finishing each other's sentences when they do speak, moving in perfect synchronization as if connected by invisible strings. There is something unwholesome about such closeness. The women agree during quilting circles and church socials, something that goes beyond the natural bond of sisters into territory that feels vaguely incestuous, though they would never use that word explicitly. The twins share everything, sleep in the same narrow bed despite having 2 available, wear each other's clothes interchangeably, and seem to have no individual identity separate from their paired existence. When one is sick, the other displays identical symptoms. When one laughs, the other echoes it precisely. This perfect mirroring disturbs people in ways they cannot articulate, triggering primitive instincts about the uncanny and the unnatural. The men, however, see only their beauty, their youth, their apparent vulnerability in a world that offers few comforts and even fewer pleasures to workers whose lives consist of dangerous labor followed by exhausted sleep followed by more dangerous labor in endless cycles broken only by injury, death, or the rare holiday. The twins represent something different, something elevated above the grinding poverty that characterizes existence in these mountains. They are objects of desire and fantasy, discussed in crude terms in the mine shafts and boarding houses, imagined in scenarios that range from romantic to explicitly carnal. Their isolation makes them seem attainable in ways that married women or daughters of mine supervisors are not. Their apparent poverty suggests they might be persuaded by money or gifts or promises of escape from their hardscrabble existence. Their beauty suggests rewards worth whatever investment might be required to obtain their favor. Jacob Hargrove dies in a mine collapse on October 15, 1905, when the twins are 20 years old and winter is beginning its inexorable descent upon the mountains. The disaster occurs during the morning shift when 17 men are working a deep seam 3,000 feet from the mine entrance. The wooden support beams, inadequate from the start and weakened by moisture and the constant pressure of thousands of tons of rock, give way without warning at approximately 9:30 in the morning. The collapse propagates through 50 feet of tunnel in less than 3 seconds, filling the passage with pulverized rock and coal dust so dense that the few men who survive the initial crushing are suffocated within minutes. The disaster is discovered when the afternoon shift arrives and finds the tunnel entrance blocked by debris. Rescue efforts continue for 3 days, driven more by hope than realistic expectation, with volunteers digging frantically through unstable rubble while knowing that no one could survive that long without air or medical attention. They recover 12 bodies during those 3 days, Jacob Hargrove's among them, identified by the silver wedding band he never removed despite his wife's death 15 years earlier. 5 bodies are never recovered, remaining entombed in the collapsed tunnel which is sealed permanently rather than risk further casualties attempting extraction. the Black Mountain Mining Company offers compensation of 1 week's wages to the families of the deceased, exactly $16.80, along with a perfunctory expression of regret delivered by a company representative who travels from the regional office in Lexington. This representative is a thin man in a suit too expensive for the occasion, reading from a prepared statement about unfortunate accidents and the inherent dangers of mining that all employees accept as conditions of employment. He stays less than an hour, distributing envelopes of cash and collecting signatures on release forms that absolve the company of further liability. The community rallies briefly around the orphan sisters with the automatic solidarity that characterizes frontier existence where today's helper might be tomorrow's victim requiring help. Women bring cornbread and jars of preserved vegetables, offerings that represent genuine sacrifice from households operating on subsistence margins. Men offer prayers and practical advice about finding husbands quickly or seeking work in the textile mills that are beginning to operate in larger towns. The local Baptist minister, a severe man named Reverend Thaddeus Cook, delivers a sermon about God's mysterious ways and the need to accept suffering as divine will, advice that provides no practical assistance but fulfills his pastoral obligations. The twins accept these offerings with cold gratitude that strikes observers as appropriate given their grief but somehow lacking genuine warmth. They stand at their father's funeral, one of 7 held simultaneously for the collapse victims, dressed in black dresses borrowed from the church charity box, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes dry of tears. They thank each person who offers condolences with identical phrases delivered in identical tones, maintaining proper decorum without displaying actual emotion. Within weeks, the community's attention moves elsewhere to other tragedies, other needs, other lives crushed beneath the weight of poverty and dangerous labor that defines existence in these mountains. The twins are forgotten by everyone except the men who notice their beauty and see in their orphan status an opportunity that did not exist while their father lived to protect them. The twins do not seek husbands or work in the traditional sense expected of young women in their position. They do not present themselves at the textile mill in Hazard where female workers operate looms for 60 cents per day in conditions only marginally less dangerous than the mines. They do not approach families seeking domestic servants or laundresses or cooks. They do not turn to the church for assistance or accept the minister's offers to arrange respectable marriages with older widowers seeking housekeepers and mothers for their children. Instead, they begin to frequent the roadhouse 3 miles down the mountain from their cabin, a ramshackle establishment that occupies questionable legal status, operating without license or oversight in a region where such formalities are rarely enforced. This roadhouse is owned and operated by Silas Combs, a 58-year-old man with gaps in his teeth from decades of bar fights, one eye permanently clouded from a poorly healed injury, and a reputation for watering his whiskey and cheating at cards. The building itself is a long, low structure constructed from rough-cut lumber, featuring a plank bar, mismatched tables and chairs salvaged from various sources, and a back room where prostitutes conduct their business with miners who have cash after payday. The atmosphere reeks of tobacco smoke, spilled alcohol, unwashed bodies, and desperation. This is not a place where respectable women appear voluntarily, and the few women present are universally understood to be available for purchase by the hour. The clientele consists entirely of miners, teamsters, and traveling salesmen, men whose common denominator is limited money and unlimited appetite for anything that might temporarily relieve the grinding tedium of their lives. Lily and Rose do not sell themselves overtly as the other women do, negotiating prices and retiring to the back room with customers. Instead, they position themselves as something different, something ambiguous, women who might be persuaded rather than purchased, whose favors represent conquest rather than transaction. They accept drinks bought by men eager to impress them, sipping slowly to make each drink last while encouraging their benefactors to consume more rapidly and purchase additional rounds. They dance when the itinerant fiddler who appears on Saturday nights plays waltzes and reels, allowing their partners to hold them close, to feel the warmth of their bodies, to imagine possibilities that remain perpetually just beyond reach. They laugh at crude jokes with voices like honey poured over gravel, a sound that seems to promise intimacy while delivering nothing concrete. They touch arms and shoulders during conversation, brief contacts that feel accidental but are carefully calculated to maintain interest without granting satisfaction. Silas Combs allows their presence because they draw customers in numbers that increase his profits despite the drinks they consume without paying. Men who might spend an hour and $2 at the Roadhouse will stay 4 hours and spend $8 when Lily and Rose are present, buying drink after drink in hopes of gaining their attention, competing with other men for the privilege of sitting beside them, fantasizing about what might happen if they can just say the right thing or offer the right gift or wait until the right moment. The twins play this game with expert precision despite their youth, understanding instinctively that the promise of satisfaction is more profitable than satisfaction itself, that hope keeps men spending long after certainty would have sent them home. The first man to disappear is Thomas Brennan, a mine foreman originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who came to Kentucky seeking better pay and found instead the same grinding poverty dressed in different geography and slightly better weather. Thomas is 37 years old in November of 1905, with graying temples, a carefully maintained mustache, and hands that show the characteristic coal dust staining of his occupation but lack the severe scarring and missing fingers common among ordinary miners. He holds a position of minor authority as foreman of the afternoon shift at Black Mountain Mine No. 3, responsible for supervising 20 workers and ensuring production quotas are met regardless of safety concerns or worker complaints. This position pays $3.60 per day, a full $1.20 more than ordinary miners receive, placing him in the lower tier of mining company hierarchy between manual labor and management. Thomas left Pennsylvania 3 years ago under circumstances he does not discuss openly, though rumors circulate that he abandoned a wife and 4 children after a series of bad investments left him deeply in debt. He claims to be unmarried when asked directly, a lie he tells so frequently that he almost believes it himself. In Kentucky, he lives in a boarding house operated by a widow named Mrs. Darlington, occupying a small room on the 2nd floor that contains a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and nothing else. He pays $4 per week for the room and 2 meals daily, a rate that leaves him approximately $9 per week after expenses, money he should be saving to send back to his family or accumulate towards some future plan. Instead, he spends most of it at the Roadhouse, drinking to forget his failures and pursuing women who remind him of being young and having possibilities. Thomas notices Lily and Rose during his first visit to the Roadhouse in September. They are impossible not to notice, their beauty standing out starkly against the rough environment and rougher clientele. He watches them for several weeks before approaching, studying their patterns, noting how they manipulate other men, determining that they are more sophisticated than they initially appear. When he finally introduces himself, he does so differently than the other miners, speaking to them with courtesy rather than crude presumption, asking about their lives with what seems like genuine interest, positioning himself as someone who might help them escape their circumstances rather than someone seeking to exploit those circumstances for his own gratification. The twins respond to this approach because it represents a change from the usual pattern. Thomas has money, education beyond basic literacy, a position of authority, and the articulate manner of someone who came from better circumstances even if he no longer occupies them. He buys them drinks but does not immediately demand return on his investment. He converses about topics beyond mining and weather, discussing books he has read and places he has lived, painting verbal pictures of a world larger than Shadow Hollow and its immediate vicinity. He treats them like ladies rather than potential conquests, standing when they approach, pulling out chairs, offering his coat when they claim to be cold. This behavior is calculated rather than sincere, but calculation does not make it less effective. The twins find themselves genuinely interested in Thomas Brennan despite their instinct to maintain emotional distance from all men. Over 6 weeks, Thomas invests approximately $50 in cultivating the twins' attention, a sum that represents more than half his discretionary income during that period. He gives them small gifts purchased from the company store, ribbons and candy, and a bottle of toilet water that smells like roses, items that cost little but represent thoughtfulness that other men do not display. He walks them partway home on several occasions, stopping at the point where the path becomes too steep and dark to navigate safely, always behaving as a gentleman should, never pressuring them for more than conversation and the pleasure of their company. He talks about possibly helping them find work in Hazard or even Lexington, where women with their beauty and intelligence could become shop girls or restaurant hostesses, earning real money in safe conditions. These promises are almost certainly lies, but they are lies the twins want to believe because the alternative is remaining in Shadow Hollow forever, growing older and harder until their beauty fades and they become indistinguishable from every other worn-out woman in these mountains. The evening of November 18th, 1905, is cold but not yet frigid, with temperatures hovering around 35 degrees as darkness falls at 5:30 in the afternoon. Fog begins rolling down from the peaks around 4 o'clock, earlier than usual, becoming dense enough by 6 o'clock that visibility extends barely 10 feet in any direction. The roadhouse is crowded with Saturday night customers, men who received their weekly pay that morning and are eager to spend it before Sunday's church services remind them of their moral obligations. Thomas arrives at 7 o'clock, already slightly drunk from whiskey consumed alone in his room while working up courage for what he has planned. He finds Lily and Rose at their usual table near the pot-bellied stove that provides inadequate heat against the drafty building's many gaps and cracks. Thomas sits with the twins for 2 hours, buying them drinks, talking more freely than usual, dropping hints that tonight might be special, that he has something important to discuss with them in private. The twins exchange glances that communicate entire conversations, evaluating this opportunity, weighing risks against potential benefits, reaching silent agreement about how to proceed. At 9 o'clock, when the roadhouse is at its most crowded and chaotic, Lily suggests they walk outside for fresh air, claiming the smoke and noise have given her a headache. Thomas agrees immediately, helping both sisters with their coats, announcing loudly to nearby patrons that he is walking the ladies home like a proper gentleman. Several men hear this statement and later repeat it to investigators, establishing the timeline and Thomas's intentions. They leave the roadhouse together, 3 figures disappearing into fog so thick it seems almost solid. The temperature has dropped to near freezing, and the moisture in the fog is beginning to crystallize into ice particles that sting exposed skin. Thomas walks between the twins, offering an arm to each, his breath visible as white clouds that disperse immediately into the surrounding gray. The path up the mountain is narrow and steep, forcing them to walk in single file in some sections, Thomas following while one twin leads and the other follows behind. The fog transforms familiar landmarks into alien shapes, making even the well-known path seem treacherous and uncertain. Sound travels strangely in these conditions, voices seeming to come from unexpected directions, footsteps on frozen ground muffled until they seem to originate inside one's own head. The walk to the Hargrove cabin normally takes 30 minutes at a steady pace. That night it takes closer to 45 minutes, slowed by poor visibility and Thomas's increasing intoxication. He talks continuously during the climb, nervous energy manifesting as compulsive speech, telling stories about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his work in the mines, his plans for the future. The twins say little, making encouraging sounds but offering no substantial response, conserving their energy for the steep climb and for what they have already decided will happen when they reach the cabin. Thomas interprets their silence as shyness or anticipation, imagining that tonight will mark a turning point in their relationship, that he will finally receive the rewards he has invested so much time and money pursuing. They reach the cabin at approximately 10:15, the structure barely visible until they are within arm's reach, its dark bulk materializing from the fog like a ship emerging from heavy seas. The cabin is cold inside, the fire having died hours ago, and Rose immediately sets about relighting it while Lily lights 2 kerosene lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. Thomas looks around with interest, noting the poverty evident in every detail but saying nothing that might offend his hosts. He accepts a chair at the rough table, gratefully warming his hands over the growing fire, talking about how cozy the cabin seems despite its modest circumstances. He is relaxed now, confident, certain that his patience and investment are about to be rewarded. Rose brings coffee in chipped ceramic cups, the liquid weak and barely warm but appreciated in the cold cabin. She adds sugar without asking, stirring Thomas's cup before setting it before him, a domestic gesture that he finds charming. Lily sits close to Thomas, her thigh pressing against his, her hand resting on his arm in what could be casual contact but feels deliberately intimate. She talks softly about how kind he has been to them, how different he is from other men, how grateful they are for his attention and generosity. Thomas responds with increasing boldness, his hand moving from Lily's arm to her waist, pulling her closer, suggesting that gratitude might be expressed in more tangible ways. He is so focused on Lily that he does not notice Rose moving behind him, does not see her reach into the wooden box beside the stove where kindling is stored, does not register danger until the moment she brings the firewood down on the back of his skull with force sufficient to crack bone. Thomas Brennan does not die immediately. The blow stuns him, causing him to pitch forward onto the table, blood flowing freely from the wound on his head, consciousness flickering but not extinguished. He tries to rise, his body responding with the automatic survival instinct that overrides rational thought in moments of crisis. But Lily is ready, having moved the moment Rose struck, positioning herself to prevent his escape. She has a kitchen knife in her hand, a weapon kept sharp for butchering rabbits and preparing vegetables, and she drives it into Thomas's chest with surprising strength, aiming for his heart but striking slightly to the left, puncturing his lung instead. Thomas makes a sound between a scream and a cough, blood bubbling from his mouth, his eyes wide with shock and incomprehension. He tries to speak, to ask why, but his punctured lung prevents anything beyond wet gurgling sounds. Rose strikes him again with the firewood, this time hitting the side of his head with a blow that makes a sound like a mallet striking a melon, and Thomas Brennan stops struggling, his body going slack, consciousness departing even if death has not yet arrived. The twins work together to drag his body away from the table, leaving a smear of blood across the rough floorboards. They lay him near the back wall where the floor is slightly sunken, an area that shows evidence of previous water damage and staining that might or might not be old blood. Thomas breathes in shallow gasps for perhaps 10 minutes while the twins search his pockets systematically, removing his wallet containing $8.30, his pocket watch with his initials engraved on the case, a silver ring he wears on his right hand, and a folding knife with bone handle. They set these items aside to be dealt with later, focusing instead on the immediate problem of the dying man whose blood is pooling on their floor. Rose fetches a heavy quilt from one of the trunks, old and stained from years of use, and they wrap Thomas's body in it, containing most of the blood still leaking from his wounds. They wait another 20 minutes until his breathing stops completely, until they are certain he is dead, before beginning the process of disposing of his body. The cabin's location is strategic for purposes the twins' father never anticipated. Behind the structure, barely 15 feet from the back wall, the mountainside drops away sharply into thick woods. Within those woods, concealed by undergrowth and barely visible even in daylight, is the entrance to an abandoned mine shaft dating from the 1870s when coal was first discovered in these mountains. This shaft was dug by hand over 2 years by prospectors who found a small seam, extracted what they could with primitive tools, and moved on when the seam played out. The shaft extends approximately 30 feet into the mountainside at a downward angle of perhaps 20 degrees, ending in a small chamber where the seam terminated. Over the decades since abandonment, water has seeped in, creating a pool of unknown depth at the shaft's lowest point. The entrance is partially collapsed, but a determined person can still squeeze through the gap in the fallen timbers and stones that once supported the opening. Lily and Rose have known about this mine shaft their entire lives. They played near its entrance as children, daring each other to enter but never going more than a few feet inside, frightened by darkness and stories about unstable tunnels and toxic gases. Their father warned them repeatedly to stay away, threats that became unnecessary as they grew older and developed better judgment about obvious dangers. But they never forgot about it, this dark hole in the mountainside so close to their home, and when Thomas Brennan's blood began pooling on their floor, they thought simultaneously of the shaft and its potential use. They drag his wrapped body out the back door, struggling with the dead weight across uneven ground, making slow progress through the fog and darkness. The entrance is even more collapsed than they remembered, requiring them to remove several large stones before the opening is wide enough to push the body through. They work in silence, their breathing heavy from exertion, their hands scraped and bruised from moving stones, their determination unwavering. The body slides into the shaft with less difficulty than expected, the wrapped form disappearing into darkness with a series of bumps and scrapes as it rolls down the sloping tunnel. They hear a splash perhaps 30 seconds later, indicating the body reached the water at the bottom. They stand at the entrance for several minutes, listening for any other sounds, hearing only the drip of water and the whisper of wind through the collapsed timbers. Satisfied, they replace the stones they removed, restoring the entrance to its appearance of complete collapse, then return to the cabin to clean up the blood and other evidence of what just occurred. Cleaning takes most of the night. Blood has seeped between the floorboards in several places, requiring them to scrub with lye soap and water, working carefully to avoid leaving obvious cleaned areas that would draw attention. They burn the quilt in the fireplace, feeding it slowly to avoid suspicious smoke, watching the blood-soaked fabric blacken and curl and turn to ash. They wash the knife and the piece of firewood used as a weapon, then burn the firewood as well, eliminating any evidence beyond the knife itself which they need for ordinary tasks. By dawn the cabin appears normal, perhaps slightly cleaner than usual, with nothing to indicate that a man died there hours earlier. The twins sleep for a few hours, exhausted by physical labor and emotional tension, then wake in early afternoon to begin the process of disposing of Thomas Brennan's belongings. They cannot sell items locally without raising immediate suspicion. Everyone knows Thomas, knows his belongings, knows he disappeared. Instead, they plan a trip to Hazard, 23 miles distant, where they can sell to merchants who ask few questions about sellers' relationships to the goods they offer. This trip requires careful planning. They cannot simply appear with valuable items given their known poverty. They must create a plausible story about inheritance or gifts, must dress appropriately for town rather than their usual worn dresses, must behave like legitimate sellers rather than thieves or murderers. They spend several days preparing, rehearsing their story, choosing which items to sell first and which to hold for future sales. The pocket watch goes into hiding immediately, too distinctive with its engraved initials to risk trying to sell. The ring might be sold later after enough time has passed. The wallet's cash they can use immediately without risk. The knife they discard in a ravine miles from their cabin. Thomas Brennan is reported missing on Monday morning when he fails to appear for his shift at the mine. His absence is noted but not immediately alarming, as foremen occasionally take unauthorized days off, particularly after weekends when heavy drinking is common. But when he remains absent on Tuesday and Wednesday, and when his room at Mrs. Darlington's boarding house shows no sign of his return, concern grows. Sheriff Coleman Pike is notified on Wednesday afternoon and begins a preliminary investigation by interviewing people who saw Thomas on Saturday night. Multiple witnesses place him at the roadhouse with Lily and Rose Hargrove, and several men heard him announce his intention to walk the sisters home. Pike naturally wants to question the twins about what happened after they left the roadhouse. The sheriff arrives at the Hargrove cabin on Thursday morning, riding his horse up the mountain path because the steep terrain makes his automobile useless for this purpose. He finds Lily and Rose at home, occupied with ordinary domestic tasks, appearing surprised and concerned when he tells them about Thomas's disappearance. They answer his questions with perfect composure, explaining that Thomas did indeed walk them home on Saturday night, behaving as a perfect gentleman throughout, declining their invitation to come inside for coffee because he wanted to return to town before the fog made travel too dangerous. They last saw him beginning his descent down the mountain path around 10:30, they estimate, though time is difficult to judge precisely in darkness and fog. They express genuine seeming concern about his welfare, suggesting he might have lost his way in the fog and fallen into one of the many ravines or abandoned mine shafts that pit the area. They offer to help with search efforts in any way they can. Sheriff Pike accepts their story without obvious suspicion but makes note of certain details that trouble him. The twins are too composed, their story too perfectly rehearsed, their concern too theatrical to feel entirely genuine. But he has no evidence of wrongdoing, no body, no witnesses to anything but Thomas leaving the roadhouse with them voluntarily. He organizes search parties that spend 4 days combing the mountainside, checking every ravine and abandoned mine shaft they know about, calling Thomas's name into the fog that continues to plague the region. They find nothing, no body, no blood, no torn clothing, no sign that Thomas Brennan ever walked that path. After a week, The search is officially suspended with the working assumption that Thomas fell into some hidden hole or ravine where his body might not be discovered for years if ever. The case remains open but inactive, filed among the dozens of other missing persons cases that accumulate in any region where isolation and dangerous terrain combine to make disappearances unremarkable. The twins wait 3 weeks before traveling to Hazard to sell Thomas's belongings. They make the trip on a Saturday, hiring a wagon from a neighbor for 50 cents, telling him they need to purchase supplies unavailable locally. In Hazard, they visit 3 different merchants, selling the ring to one, the wallet to another, some clothing items they claimed were their father's to a third. They receive a total of $7.20, far less than the items are worth but acceptable given their need to avoid excessive scrutiny. They purchase fabric and other supplies to justify their trip, then return home satisfied that they have successfully disposed of their first victim and his possessions without raising alarm. They do not yet know this is their first victim, that this success will lead to others, that they have discovered a method of survival that will escalate into serial murder. But some part of them already understands that they have crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed, that killing Thomas Brennan has changed them fundamentally, that the line between victim and predator has been not just crossed but obliterated. Winter descends on eastern Kentucky with the savage intensity characteristic of Appalachian mountain ranges where elevation and geography combine to create weather systems more severe than those experienced in the surrounding lowlands. By December, temperatures regularly drop below 20 degrees Fahrenheit at night, climbing to barely above freezing during brief daylight hours that seem insufficient to melt the snow and ice that accumulate in layers over weeks. The mining operations continue despite weather that would halt less profitable industries, because coal must be extracted regardless of season or safety considerations, because workers need wages regardless of conditions, because the industrial economy of the early 20th century operates with relentless momentum that recognizes no humanitarian concerns. The mines employ hundreds in eastern Kentucky, and those hundreds support thousands through networks of family and commerce, creating an economic ecosystem where stopping work for weather would mean starvation for entire communities. The roadhouse becomes an even more crucial refuge during winter, packed to capacity on Saturday nights with men seeking heat and alcohol and temporary escape from the grinding routine of dangerous labor and inadequate shelter. The building's interior is thick with tobacco smoke, creating a haze that reduces visibility almost as effectively as the fog outside. The smell is overwhelming to newcomers but barely noticed by regulars who have grown accustomed to the concentrated odor of unwashed bodies, spilled whiskey, coal dust that clings to everything, and the vague underlying scent of desperation that characterizes places where people come to forget their circumstances temporarily. The pot-bellied stove glows red from constant feeding, radiating heat that barely reaches the walls and does nothing to eliminate drafts through the many gaps in the building's crude construction. Men stand as close to the stove as possible, rotating positions to warm different parts of their bodies, accepting occasional burns as inevitable prices for heat. Lily and Rose attend the roadhouse with increasing regularity throughout December and January, their presence becoming expected rather than remarkable, their beauty undiminished by winter cold or the general deterioration that characterizes everyone else who endures this harsh season. They have developed a comfortable routine, arriving around 7 o'clock on Saturday evenings, positioning themselves near the stove, accepting drinks from an increasingly familiar rotation of admirers who compete for their attention with diminishing originality. The twins' success with Thomas Brennan, though known only to them, has altered their confidence and approach. They are more selective now, paying attention primarily to men who show signs of wealth exceeding the ordinary miner's $2 daily wage, men who occupy supervisory positions or work as traveling salesmen or visiting investors evaluating coal seam quality and potential profitability. The second victim is Henry Walsh, a 28-year-old miner from West Virginia who came to Kentucky in November seeking better opportunities and finding instead the same brutal conditions under different management. Henry is tall and powerfully built, standing 6 feet 2 inches and weighing approximately 200 pounds of muscle developed through years of manual labor starting when he was 14 years old. He has thick brown hair, green eyes, and a quick smile that reveals surprisingly good teeth, a rarity among miners who often lose teeth to calcium deficiency and lack of dental care. Henry is handsome in the uncomplicated way of young men who rely on physical presence rather than sophistication, and he carries himself with the confidence of someone who has won multiple fights and expects to win future ones. He boards at the same house where Thomas Brennan lived, occupying the dead man's former room because Mrs. Darlington needs the income and cannot afford sentiment about previous occupants. He knows about Thomas's disappearance, has heard the stories about walking the Hargrove twins home and never returning, but he dismisses these stories as superstition and coincidence, believing that his strength and alertness make him immune to whatever fate befell Thomas. Henry becomes infatuated with the twins during his first visit to the Roadhouse in early December. He approaches them with the straightforward confidence of someone accustomed to success with women, buying them drinks, complimenting their beauty with crude directness that lacks Thomas's sophistication but possesses an honest intensity that the twins find almost refreshing. Henry has dreams beyond mining, plans to save enough money to purchase a small farm in the flatlands where he can raise tobacco or corn, marry a good woman, father children who will never enter a mine shaft. He talks about these dreams with genuine passion, describing the farm in vivid detail as if visualization might somehow make it materialize, calculating how long he must work and how much he must save to transform fantasy into reality. The twins listen with apparent interest, asking questions about his plans, encouraging his visions of escape, positioning themselves as sympathetic audience to his ambitions. Over 6 weeks, Henry invests approximately $35 in pursuing the twins, a sum that represents significant sacrifice given his stated goal of saving money. He brings them small gifts, candy and ribbon, a wool scarf to share between them, a bottle of perfume that costs a full day's wages. He walks them partway home on multiple occasions, always stopping before reaching the cabin because the hour grows too late or the fog grows too thick or he needs to return for his shift. The twins encourage this courtship carefully, rationing their attention to maintain Henry's interest without granting satisfaction too easily, creating tension that keeps him pursuing even as his savings diminish and his farm dreams recede further into an uncertain future. They let him kiss them, brief encounters that occur in the darkness near the Roadhouse door, his lips meeting first lilies then roses in experiences he cannot later differentiate, creating confusion about which sister he is actually courting or whether he is courting both simultaneously. On December 23, 1905, 3 days before Christmas, Henry receives his weekly pay plus a small bonus that the mining company distributes irregularly to maintain worker morale. The bonus amounts to $1.20, enough to purchase a special gift or an evening of heavy drinking, a windfall by the standards of men who calculate expenditures in pennies. Henry decides to spend this bonus on the twins, imagining that generosity during the Christmas season might finally persuade them to grant the favors he has pursued for weeks. He arrives at the Roadhouse at 6:30, earlier than usual, already slightly drunk from whiskey consumed in his room while preparing for the evening. He finds the twins at their customary table, dressed in new dresses that Henry does not recognize, dark blue fabric that makes their pale skin seem even more luminous in the dim lamplight. He sits without invitation, spreading his money on the table in a display of wealth that would be pathetic if it were not so desperate, announcing that tonight is special, that he intends to treat the ladies to the best evening the Roadhouse can provide. The twins accept his declaration with appropriate enthusiasm, allowing Henry to buy them drinks, food from the limited menu the Roadhouse offers, attention from the fiddler who plays requests for customers who tip adequately. Henry drinks heavily, his natural caution eroded by alcohol and confidence, talking loudly about his plans to take the twins somewhere special, perhaps to his room at the boarding house where they can have privacy and comfort impossible in the crowded, noisy Roadhouse. The twins deflect this suggestion gently, saying that Mrs. Darlington would never permit female visitors in tenant rooms, that such behavior would damage their reputations irreparably, that if Henry truly cares for them he will find a more respectable solution. Henry, desperate and drunk, suggests marriage, a proposal that emerges half-formed and entirely impulsive but contains enough sincerity to be touching. The twins laugh gently, treating this proposal as sweet but premature, requiring more courtship and consideration before such serious commitment. As the evening progresses and Henry's money diminishes, Lily suggests an alternative. They could go to the cabin, which offers privacy without the impropriety of a boarding house room. Henry could be their Christmas guest, share coffee and conversation in appropriate circumstances, perhaps stay the night on their extra bed because the weather is too dangerous for travel after midnight. This suggestion is delivered with perfect innocence, framed as practical concern rather than sexual invitation, but Henry interprets it exactly as intended, as promise of rewards earned through patient investment. He agrees immediately, so eagerly that other patrons notice and exchange knowing glances, some amused and others concerned, remembering Thomas Brennan's similar departure and his permanent absence thereafter. One man, a miner named Dutch Kerner, actually warns Henry explicitly, saying that men who walk home with the Hargrove girls have a way of disappearing. Henry laughs at this warning, clapping Dutch on the shoulder, saying that maybe those other men got what they wanted and decided to stay disappeared. The implications of this crude joke are lost in general laughter, and Henry leaves the roadhouse with Lily and Rose around 9:30 on a night when temperature hovers near zero and fog has returned with its customary density. The walk up the mountain takes 50 minutes, slowed by Henry's intoxication and the treacherous conditions underfoot where ice has formed over existing snow. Henry talks continuously during the climb, his words slightly slurred, his breathing heavy from altitude and alcohol and exertion. He talks about his farm dreams again, but now the fantasy includes the twins, imagining them as his wives in some arrangement he has not fully conceptualized but finds intensely appealing, picturing them helping with farm work, cooking his meals, warming his bed. The twins listen without comment, conserving their energy for the climb and for what must happen when they reach the cabin. They have agreed wordlessly, as they agree on everything important, that Henry Walsh will become their second victim, that his money and belongings will provide resources they need, that his disappearance will be attributed to the same mysterious fate that claimed Thomas Brennan. They reach the cabin at 10:20, the building invisible until they are within touching distance, materializing from fog like a ship emerging from heavy seas. Inside, Rose lights lamps while Lily builds up the fire, the routine now familiar, the roles distributed automatically without discussion. Henry removes his coat and boots, settling heavily into a chair near the fire, grateful for warmth and rest. He watches the twins move around the cabin with proprietary satisfaction, imagining that this scene represents a preview of married life, domestic comfort after long days of labor. He does not notice how the twins exchange glances that communicate entire strategies, how they position themselves carefully, Rose behind him and Lily within arm's reach, how their movements become synchronized in ways that precede violence. Rose brings coffee but Henry waves it away, requesting whiskey instead, his day of drinking not yet complete. The twins apologize for having no whiskey, offering water or weak tea, but Henry is not ready to become sober. He begins to make advances on Lily, pulling her roughly onto his lap, his hands moving boldly over her body, his intentions clear and immediate. Lily allows this for several seconds, long enough for Henry to become completely focused on her, before she signals Rose with a slight nod. Rose moves silently, lifting the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, approaching Henry from behind, raising the poker with both hands, bringing it down on his skull with force sufficient to crush bone. The blow makes a sound like wood splitting, and Henry's body goes rigid before collapsing, Lily barely managing to roll away before his weight would have trapped her beneath him. But Henry Walsh is not killed by the first blow. His thick skull and heavy musculature protect him from immediate death, and he struggles to rise, making sounds between rage and confusion, blood streaming from his head wound. The twins panic briefly, their plan failing to account for a victim who remains dangerous after the initial strike. Henry manages to get to his feet, turning toward Rose with murder in his eyes, reaching for her despite his obvious disorientation. Lily grabs the kitchen knife from the table, driving it into Henry's back between his shoulder blades, the blade penetrating deep into his torso but missing his heart and spine. Henry roars in pain and rage, spinning to face this new threat, his hand reaching back to pull the knife from his back. Rose strikes him again with the poker, this blow landing on his temple, and finally Henry falls, his massive body hitting the floor hard enough to shake the entire cabin. He continues to move, crawling toward the door, leaving a trail of blood across the floorboards. The twins follow, striking him repeatedly with poker and knife, wounds accumulating until finally he stops moving, stops breathing, his body still at last after a struggle that lasted several minutes and left both sisters exhausted and splattered with blood. The disposal of Henry's body is more difficult than Thomas's because of his size and weight. The twins struggle to drag him across the cabin floor, their strength inadequate for 200 pounds of dead weight. They eventually resort to cutting his body into manageable pieces, a grisly process requiring hours of work with inadequate tools, blood and other fluids soaking into floorboards despite their efforts at containment. They remove his head and limbs, wrapping each piece separately in old blankets, creating 5 packages they can carry individually to the mine shaft. The disposal takes most of the night, multiple trips through freezing darkness to the shaft entrance, the gruesome sounds of body parts sliding down the tunnel and splashing into the water below. By dawn they are exhausted, traumatized by the violence required to kill Henry and the horror of dismembering his corpse, wondering if they can continue this path they have chosen. But practical considerations override their horror. Henry had $14 in his pockets, a significant sum that will sustain them for weeks. His boots are nearly new, his coat is warm wool, his few belongings include a decent pocket watch and a silver belt buckle. These items represent survival, resources they desperately need. The cleanup is more extensive than after Thomas's murder, requiring them to scrub the cabin extensively, burn multiple blankets and rags, carefully inspect every surface for blood they might have missed. They work methodically through their exhaustion, understanding that discovery means hanging, that they have committed murder twice and cannot claim accidental circumstance. By afternoon the cabin appears clean again, the blood scrubbed away, the evidence destroyed, their secret maintained through brutal efficiency. Henry Walsh is reported missing on Christmas Day when he fails to appear for dinner at Mrs. Darlington's boarding house, a holiday meal she provides annually for her tenants. The report triggers immediate concern given Thomas Brennan's disappearance from the same boarding house 2 months earlier. Sheriff Pike interviews Mrs. Darlington, learning that Henry last spoke of spending Saturday evening with the Hargrove twins, an echo so precise that Pike feels cold certainty despite lacking evidence. He rides to the cabin on December 26th, finding the twins at home, calm and cooperative. They explain that Henry did walk them home but left shortly after arrival, claiming he wanted to return before the cold became unbearable. They saw him heading down the mountain around 11 o'clock, his last words something about meeting them at church on Christmas Day. They express concern that he never appeared, suggest he might have fallen in the darkness, offer to help search. Sheriff Pike does not believe them but cannot prove they are lying. He searches the cabin with their permission, finding nothing suspicious. The floorboards show scrubbing, but this seems normal house cleaning rather than evidence concealment. He organizes search parties that find nothing because there is nothing to find except pieces of Henry Walsh at the bottom of a mine shaft that has already swallowed 1 victim. After a week the search is abandoned with assumptions that Henry suffered the same fate as Thomas, that the mountain has claimed another victim through some combination of bad luck and dangerous conditions. But Pike's suspicions have hardened into private conviction that the twins are somehow responsible, that 2 disappearances from the same starting point exceed coincidental probability. He begins watching them more closely, visiting their cabin on invented pretexts, hoping to catch them in inconsistency or discover evidence they have hidden imperfectly. The pattern continues through winter and spring. In February, Michael O'Brien disappears after leaving the roadhouse with the twins, a 32-year-old Irishman working as a teamster. In March, James Tucker vanishes, a 35-year-old mine supervisor who should have known better. In April, William Hodge disappears, a 40-year-old traveling salesman who made the fatal mistake of flashing too much money. Each man is charmed, each invests time and resources pursuing the twins, each makes the walk up the mountain through fog, each dies in the cabin, each is disposed of in the mine shaft that has become a mass grave. The twins refine their method with each killing, becoming more efficient at murder and cleanup, developing rituals that reduce emotional impact and increase operational success. They learn to strike harder and faster, to avoid the prolonged struggle that characterized Henry Walsh's death. They learn to control bleeding better, to dispose of bodies more efficiently, to sell belongings more carefully in towns increasingly distant from Shadow Hollow. By May they have killed 7 men and accumulated significant money, approximately $130 total, a fortune by standards of women living alone in poverty. They use this money carefully, purchasing only items and improvements that can be explained plausibly, avoiding sudden wealth that would trigger suspicion. They buy better dresses and shoes, repair the cabin's roof and chimney, purchase enough food to maintain health without dependence on charity. They begin to feel secure in their method, confident that they will never be caught because their system works, because the fog conceals everything, because men disappear regularly in mining country and their specific disappearances blend into that general pattern. But they do not understand that patterns themselves create visibility, that statistical clustering can reveal truth even without physical evidence, that they have become so efficient at murder that efficiency itself has become their vulnerability. By late May of 1908, Eastern Kentucky is experiencing unseasonable warmth and clarity, the perpetual fog retreating temporarily as spring weather establishes dominance over lingering winter patterns. This unusual clarity allows Sheriff Coleman Pike to see the Hargrove cabin from various vantages where normally it would be obscured, and this visibility fuels his obsession with the twins who he now believes with absolute certainty are responsible for 7 disappearances spanning 7 months. Pike is a practical man, 53 years old, raised in these mountains by parents who homesteaded marginal land and scratched survival from soil barely adequate for subsistence farming. He became sheriff 22 years ago through appointment after the previous sheriff was killed attempting to arrest a moonshiner, and he has held the position through 5 subsequent elections because he possesses the combination of competence and political neutrality valued in frontier communities where law enforcement must balance justice against community cohesion. He has investigated hundreds of crimes, from petty theft to murder, from moonshining to claim jumping, and he understands that proof and certainty are different things, that the law requires evidence even when intuition screams truth. Pike's certainty about the twins is based on statistical reasoning and pattern recognition rather than physical evidence. 7 single men have disappeared in 7 months, each last seen with Lily and Rose Hargrove, each vanishing under virtually identical circumstances involving fog and late-night walks to the twins' cabin. The probability of this being coincidental approaches mathematical impossibility. Additionally, Pike has noticed that the twins' material condition has improved substantially since these disappearances began, that they wear better clothes and shoes, that their cabin shows signs of maintenance and improvement inconsistent with their supposed poverty. When questioned about these improvements, the twins explain that they sell items left by their father, take in sewing work, receive occasional gifts from admirers. These explanations are barely plausible individually and completely implausible collectively, but Pike cannot disprove them without evidence that physical searches have failed to reveal. The sheriff's frustration grows with each failed investigation, each search that finds nothing, each interview where the twins maintain their innocent facade with perfect consistency. He considers arresting them on suspicion and pressing charges based on circumstantial evidence, but his limited legal training tells him that circumstantial evidence without physical proof rarely survives trial, especially when defendants are beautiful young women who can claim victimization by circumstances and male attention. He needs proof, needs bodies or confession or witnesses to actual crimes, needs something beyond statistical unlikelihood and personal conviction. His frustration manifests as increasingly aggressive investigation, visiting the cabin weekly on invented pretexts, questioning the twins about trivial matters while searching for inconsistencies, making his suspicions obvious in ways that might pressure them into mistakes. But the twins do not make mistakes. They answer Pike's questions with consistent courtesy, expressing concern about the missing men, offering theories about accidents and abandoned mine shafts, maintaining their story with perfect discipline. They have advantages Pike does not fully appreciate. Their identical appearance creates confusion in witnesses who cannot reliably distinguish between them. Their complete mutual trust means neither will betray the other under pressure. Their genuine poverty means they have nothing to lose by continuing their crimes. They understand that Pike suspects them but cannot prove anything, that suspicion without evidence is meaningless, that if they remain disciplined and careful they will never be caught. This confidence makes them dangerous, removing the normal caution that prevents most criminals from escalating their activities. The situation changes in early June when Marcus Webb arrives in Shadow Hollow. Webb is a private detective hired by Thomas Brennan's wife in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a woman named Margaret Brennan who refused to accept that her husband simply abandoned his family without explanation. Margaret Brennan is 42 years old, mother of 4 children ranging from 6 to 17, living in poverty after her husband's disappearance eliminated the primary source of family income. She has spent 6 months writing letters to Kentucky authorities requesting investigation, receiving polite but unhelpful responses explaining that adults are free to abandon their families, that no evidence suggests foul play, that resources do not exist for investigating every missing person. Finally, desperate and convinced that her husband would never willingly abandon his children, Margaret Brennan spends her last savings to hire Marcus Webb, a former Pinkerton agent now working independently who specializes in missing persons cases and has a reputation for results that official investigations fail to achieve. Webb is 42 years old, originally from Boston. Educated at Boston Latin School and trained through apprenticeship with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency where he worked for 15 years before leaving over philosophical disagreements about labor disputes and the agency's willingness to serve corporate interests against workers. He has been working independently for 7 years, taking cases that interest him personally regardless of financial prospects, developing a reputation as someone who solves difficult cases through methodical investigation and willingness to take risks that official investigators avoid. He is of average height and build, approximately 5 feet 9 inches and 150 pounds, with brown hair graying at the temples and blue eyes that miss nothing. He dresses in quality clothing that marks him as an outsider in mining country, suits and vests and polished shoes that would be impractical for anyone actually living in this region but serve his purpose of establishing himself as someone distinct from the usual population. Webb arrives in Shadow Hollow on June 3rd, checking into a boarding house in the mining camp, introducing himself as a mineral rights investigator evaluating coal seams for potential investors from Philadelphia. This cover story is plausible enough to avoid immediate suspicion while allowing him to ask questions and move freely through the community. He spends his first week gathering information through casual conversation, learning about the missing men, the circumstances of their disappearances, the community's suspicions about the Hargrove twins. He interviews Sheriff Pike in his official capacity, presenting himself as someone who might help with the investigation, establishing cooperative relationship rather than competitive tension. Pike is initially skeptical of this well-dressed outsider but comes to appreciate Webb's professional competence and shares his evidence and suspicions freely, relieved to have someone who takes his concerns seriously. Webb's investigation methodology is systematic and thorough. He creates detailed timelines for each disappearance, interviewing every available witness, mapping locations and weather conditions, documenting the twins' financial transactions and material improvements. He visits neighboring towns, identifying merchants who purchased items from the twins, examining the goods sold and comparing them to descriptions of belongings owned by the missing men. He discovers the pocket watch sold by Rose matches Thomas Brennan's initialed watch. A silver belt buckle matches one owned by Henry Walsh. A leather wallet matches one described by William Hodges' employer. Each item alone might be explained as gift or coincidence, but collectively they establish a pattern of the twins possessing property belonging to missing men, property they should not have if those men simply fell into ravines or abandoned their obligations. Webb documents his findings meticulously, creating a case file that would convince any objective observer of the twins' guilt but still lacks the physical evidence required for legal prosecution. He discusses options with Sheriff Pike, and they agree that the only way to obtain definitive proof is through undercover operation where Webb himself becomes bait, posing as a wealthy potential victim while Pike's deputies maintain surveillance to intervene if the twins attempt murder. The plan is dangerous, predicated on assumptions about the twins' methods that might be inaccurate, requiring Webb to place himself in genuine danger with backup that might arrive too late to save him. But both men agree that without this risk, the twins will continue killing indefinitely, that circumstantial evidence alone will never result in prosecution, that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary methods. Webb begins his undercover performance on June 15th, appearing at the Roadhouse dressed expensively, drinking imported whiskey purchased in Hazard specifically for this purpose, displaying money carelessly, talking loudly about mineral rights investments and the substantial cash he carries for potential land purchases. His performance is carefully calculated to attract the twins' attention, presenting himself as the type of wealthy, slightly foolish outsider they have previously targeted. The twins notice him immediately, their predatory instincts triggered by obvious wealth combined with apparent vulnerability. They have been cautious since Sheriff Pike's increased attention, avoiding new victims for over a month, but Webb represents opportunity too tempting to resist, a chance for substantial profit if they can successfully eliminate him and claim his money. Lily and Rose approach Webb during his second visit to the roadhouse, introducing themselves with practiced charm, expressing fascination with his business interests, touching his arm during conversation, laughing at his jokes with apparent genuine appreciation. Webb plays his role perfectly, the successful businessman charmed by beautiful local women, enjoying attention from females significantly younger and more attractive than his usual social circle, willing to spend money freely for their company. Over 3 weeks, he invests approximately $60 in cultivating their attention, buying drinks and small gifts, walking them partway home on several occasions, always stopping before reaching the cabin because Pike's deputies require some visibility for effective surveillance. Webb uses these walks to memorize the path, noting landmarks and distances, preparing for the night when he will make the full journey knowing that his survival depends on careful planning and precise execution. The decisive evening arrives on July 10th, when conditions align perfectly for the twins' usual method. Fog returns with its characteristic density, rolling down from the peaks in thick waves that reduce visibility to less than 10 feet. Temperature drops to near 60 degrees as darkness falls, cold enough to justify seeking warmth and shelter. Webb arrives at the roadhouse at 7 o'clock, already performing his character of the successful investor celebrating a productive day of evaluations. He drinks steadily but carefully, maintaining enough sobriety to react if attacked while appearing progressively more intoxicated. Lily and Rose join him at 8 o'clock, and their behavior suggests tonight is significant, that they have decided to act. They are more attentive than usual, touching him more frequently, creating intimacy that feels genuine despite being entirely calculated. At 9:30, Lily suggests they walk to the cabin where they can talk privately without the roadhouse's noise and chaos. Webb agrees with apparent enthusiasm, ignoring warnings from other patrons who have learned to distrust invitations from the Hargrove twins. He confirms through subtle signals that Pike's 2 deputies are in position, prepared to follow at safe distance, then leaves with the twins into fog so thick it seems almost solid. The walk takes 45 minutes, climbing steeply through terrain made treacherous by darkness and limited visibility. Webb maintains continuous conversation despite growing tension, his hand resting on the revolver concealed in his jacket pocket, his senses alert for any indication of immediate danger. The twins guide him expertly, their familiarity with this path allowing them to navigate conditions that would leave most people hopelessly lost. They reach the cabin at 10:15, the structure materializing from fog exactly as it has for previous victims. Inside, the ritual proceeds according to pattern. Rose lights lamps while Lily builds the fire. Webb removes his coat but keeps his jacket, the revolver's weight reassuring against his ribs. He sits where directed, accepting coffee he does not drink, making conversation while scanning the cabin for potential threats and evidence. He notices details that suggest violence, dark stains on floorboards that might be inadequately cleaned blood, scratch marks around a trunk suggesting frequent dragging, a peculiar smell of damp earth and decay emanating from beneath the floor. These observations confirm his suspicions while increasing his danger, because if the twins realize he is investigating rather than pursuing them romantically, they might attack immediately before his backup can arrive. The moment of crisis arrives with shocking suddenness. Rose brings whiskey Webb had mentioned wanting, but as she sets the glass before him, Lily moves from behind with a fireplace poker raised to strike. Webb sees the weapon's reflection in the window glass, turning just in time to catch Lily's wrist before the poker crushes his skull. The poker connects with his shoulder instead, a painful blow that will leave massive bruising but does not disable him. Rose lunges with a knife, but Webb is already moving, drawing his revolver, firing a shot into the cabin's ceiling. The thunderous report in the confined space stuns both twins momentarily, long enough for Webb to establish control, forcing both women against the wall at gunpoint. For several minutes Webb is alone with the twins, his revolver trained steadily, his voice commanding them to remain still. The fog and distance have delayed Pike's deputies, who heard the gunshot but struggle to locate the cabin in near-zero visibility. The twins do not maintain their innocent facade now. Their beautiful faces twist with hatred and rage, cursing Webb with venom that reveals their true nature completely. They threaten his life, promise he will die like the others, make statements that constitute confession even without physical evidence. Webb keeps them talking, recording their threats mentally while searching the cabin one-handed, his revolver never wavering from its targets. He notices the loose floorboards near the back wall, understands their significance, calls for the twins to show him what is hidden beneath. Sheriff Pike and his deputies finally arrive 20 minutes after the gunshot, drawn by Webb's continued shouting and lamplight visible through windows. They enter to find Webb holding the twins at gunpoint, the sisters now silent and defiant but no longer denying their crimes. Pike immediately takes charge, binding the twins' hands with rope while Webb explains what happened. Together they pry up the loose floorboards, revealing the crawl space beneath the cabin that drops into the mountainside. The smell that emerges is overwhelming: decomposition, death, earth saturated with bodily fluids. Pike lights a lantern and ventures into the crawl space, discovering it connects to an old mine shaft. Inside that shaft, barely visible in flickering lamplight, are human remains in various stages of decomposition, some reduced to skeletal fragments, others more recent with clothing and flesh still recognizable. The process of recovering remains takes 3 full days. Pike organizes a proper investigation, bringing in deputies from neighboring counties, documenting everything with photographs and written reports that will serve as evidence during trial. They remove 7 sets of remains from the mine shaft, identifying them through clothing, personal effects, and in some cases through recognition by family members who are summoned to provide identification. Each victim is documented separately, his belongings catalogued, his cause of death determined where possible through examination of bones showing trauma from blunt force and blade wounds. The horror of the discovery shocks the community, transforming the twins from beautiful enigmas into monsters whose crimes exceed normal comprehension. The community gathers at the base of the mountain during the recovery operation, watching in horrified fascination as evidence of mass murder emerges from the Hargrove cabin. Women who defended the twins against suspicion now feel betrayed and foolish. Men who desired them now experience sick recognition of how close they came to becoming victims. The whispers about bad luck and mysterious disappearances transform into angry demands for immediate justice, for hanging without trial, for revenge against these creatures who disguise themselves as innocent victims of circumstance while systematically murdering anyone foolish enough to trust them. Sheriff Pike maintains order with difficulty, protecting the twins from potential mob violence while arranging their transport to county jail in Hazard where they can be held securely pending formal legal proceedings. The trial takes place in August, conducted in the Pike County Courthouse before Judge Cornelius Matthews, a severe figure with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for harsh sentences balanced against scrupulous legal procedure. The courtroom is packed beyond capacity with spectators who have traveled from across eastern Kentucky and neighboring states, drawn by sensational newspaper coverage that has made the Hargrove twins nationally famous. The prosecution is led by Harrison Wolfe, an ambitious assistant Commonwealth's attorney eager to make his reputation through this high-profile case. The defense is handled by Samuel Breckenridge, an elderly Hazard attorney appointed by the court because the twins lack money for private counsel and because Breckenridge's advanced age and declining practice make him one of few lawyers willing to accept a case so publicly unpopular. The prosecution's case is overwhelming. Marcus Webb testifies about the attempted murder, his investigation, and the twins' confession during the moments before arrest. Sheriff Pike testifies about the pattern of disappearances, his suspicions, and the discovery of remains. Multiple merchants testify about purchasing belongings that matched items owned by missing men. Family members identify remains through clothing and personal effects, some breaking down during testimony that requires them to confront their loved ones' deaths. Medical testimony establishes that victims died from blunt force trauma and stab wounds, injuries inconsistent with accidental death. The physical evidence alone would convict even without the twins' ill-advised statements during Webb's confrontation. The defense strategy is limited by overwhelming evidence and the twins' refusal to cooperate meaningfully with their attorney. Breckinridge attempts to argue temporary insanity caused by their father's death and subsequent trauma, claiming that poverty and isolation drove two young women to psychological break that transformed them into killers. He presents testimony about their difficult childhood, their mother's death during childbirth, their isolation and poverty. He argues that society failed these women, that proper intervention after their father's death might have prevented their crimes, that punishment should be mitigated by recognition of factors beyond their control. The argument is eloquent but ineffective against evidence of premeditation, 7 separate murders executed with increasing efficiency, careful disposal of bodies and sale of belongings showing rational planning inconsistent with insanity. The jury deliberates less than 3 hours, returning verdicts of guilty on all 7 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Matthews conducts separate sentencing hearing additional testimony and arguments before imposing sentence. He rejects defense requests for mercy, citing the calculated nature of crimes, the number of victims, the complete absence of remorse displayed by defendants. He sentences both twins to death by hanging, execution scheduled for October 1st, allowing time for mandatory appeals that everyone understands will be perfunctory and unsuccessful. The sentence is controversial because Kentucky rarely executes women, having hanged only 3 women in state history and never twins. Some newspapers argue for clemency based on the defendant's age and gender. But majority opinion supports execution, viewing the twins as monsters who deserve no consideration beyond what law mandates. The twins maintain silence through trial and sentencing, showing no emotion except occasional smirks that suggest contempt for proceedings and participants. But in final weeks before execution, they agree to newspaper interview, wanting to tell their story in their own words before death silences them permanently. The interview is conducted by Samuel Hopkins, reporter for Louisville Courier-Journal, who spends 3 days at the Pike County Jail interviewing Lily and Rose separately and together. What emerges is chilling portrait of 2 women who felt victimized by circumstances and chose to victimize others in response, who discovered killing was easier than they expected and more profitable than honest work, who felt no remorse because they viewed their victims as representatives of the society that oppressed them. They explain that Thomas Brennan was their first victim, chosen because he reminded them of mine officials whose negligence killed their father. His death was initially motivated by rage rather than profit, but discovering how easy it was to kill and dispose of a body while taking his possessions suggested methodology they could exploit systematically. Each subsequent murder became easier, more routine, almost mechanical. They felt no guilt because their victims were men who wanted to exploit them sexually, who offered money and attention in exchange for favors, who represented everything wrong with a society where women had few options beyond marriage or prostitution. They viewed themselves as predators certainly, but also as actors of justice, punishing men for their presumption and taking from them what men had taken from their family: life, security, hope. The execution is carried out on October 1st, 1908, on a cold morning when frost covers the ground and breath mists in early morning air. A gallows is constructed in the courtyard of Pike County Jail, designed to accommodate 2 bodies simultaneously so the twins can die together as they lived. Several hundred spectators gather to witness the hanging, including family members of some victims who traveled great distances to see justice served. Additional thousands are turned away when the courtyard reaches capacity. Lily and Rose walk to the gallows at 7 o'clock, their hands bound behind them, dressed in simple gray dresses provided by jail. They refuse blindfolds and final prayers, maintaining defiance to the end. They speak no final words, offer no apologies, show no fear when the hoods are placed over their heads and nooses positioned around their necks. The trapdoors open simultaneously at 7:11, the twins dropping together, their necks breaking cleanly if hangman's calculations about their weight and drop distance were accurate. They are pronounced dead after 13 minutes, their identical bodies hanging motionless in cold morning air while spectators watch in silence. Their bodies are buried in unmarked graves in Potter's Field outside Hazard, denied even the small dignity of family cemetery plot. The cabin where they killed 7 men is burned by community members who believe it has become place of evil even if they would not use that language publicly. The mine shaft is sealed with dynamite, collapsing tunnel and entombing forever the place where 7 men met their end. Sheriff Pike serves out his term and retires the following year, troubled by nightmares about the case. Marcus Webb returns to Pennsylvania, his fee paid, his reputation enhanced, but haunted by how close he came to becoming the 8th victim. The story of Lily and Rose Hargrove becomes legend in eastern Kentucky, a cautionary tale told for generations about beauty concealing evil, about desperation transforming victims into predators, about twin sisters who chose murder over survival and left behind legacy written in blood and buried in abandoned mine shaft in the unforgiving mountains of Appalachia. The fog still rolls down from the peaks in Shadow Hollow, thick and concealing as ever, but men no longer walk into it with beautiful women at their side, because memory of what happened in 1908 lingers like the fog itself, a warning about the darkness that can hide behind innocent faces, about the price of desire in a world where death is never far away. To uncover more stories that reveal the hidden secrets and forgotten mysteries of the past, leave a like if this deep investigation kept you hooked until the end. I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Did you know that 80% of people who watch aren't subscribed and end up missing incredible stories? It costs nothing. Oh, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share other dark tales that, in your opinion, deserve to be explored here on the channel. See you soon.